And today we're zooming in on one specific battle. Round 1, Group 230. And this was a fascinating mix of genres and eras. It really proves that randomization creates the most compelling and sometimes bizarre matchups.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A truly disparate lineup. And I think it's fair to say the results were probably not what most people would have predicted.
Okay, so let's lay out the contenders for Group 230.
First up, we have Once More by Spandau Ballet.
Okay.
Second, the very best of Jim Reeves.
Jim Reeves.
Third album in the group was Days of Open Hand by Suzanne Vega.
The 90s classic.
And finally, a compilation album. Classic Country Golden 50s by various artists.
Wow. Okay, so just to recap. An 80s new romantic band re-recording their hits, a 60s Nashville crooner, a 90s folk rock poet, and a compilation of 50s country rock.
I mean, what a group. You couldn't make it up.
You really couldn't. So let's unpack this. Where do we start? Let's go with the winner, the surprising powerhouse that just demolished this group. All right, so let's dig into the results of Group 230. The decisive winner, finishing number 1 and just cruising through, was Spandau Ballet's Once More.
It really was. And what's so interesting here isn't just that it won, but why it won.
Yeah.
It sort of challenges our whole idea of what makes an album great in a competition like this.
Totally. The reviewer even says they went in with this, very common assumption that Once More would just be a standard greatest hits album.
What kind of thing a label puts out for a quick buck, yeah. A retrospective.
Exactly. But it wasn't that at all. It was a complete twist. Yes, it was their famous hits, but they were entirely reworked, re-recorded from the ground up.
It's basically a concept album about memory and maturity.
And that one detail, that distinction, is huge, especially in this kind of competitive environment where you're judging production quality and arrangement against 3 other records in, like, rapid succession.
It gives them a massive advantage. You could almost say it's an unfair advantage.
Well, I was going to say that. Is it really fair to put a brand new modern recording up against tracks that were limited by, say, 1950s technology?
And that's the exact question this whole album quest forces you to ask. What is fair?
Yeah.
But the quest's goal isn't about historical fairness. It's about which album provides the best listening experience right now.
Good point.
And the reviewer was just blown away by it. They said the reinterpretation was, and I quote, brilliantly executed.
The praise for the technical side of it was, it was off the charts. They talked about the elevated solid level of production. But let's zoom in on something specific they mentioned, which I found interesting. The wonderful use of that 80s icon, the saxophone throughout.
Yes. That detail is so key because it speaks to intent, to musical maturity. Mm-hmm. The sax isn't just there, like a token 80s sound. It's used wonderfully.
Right. It's integrated.
In the original 80s tracks, the sax often felt, well, it was a product of its time, a bit bombastic.
A bit much sometimes, yeah?
A bit much. But on Once More, the reviewer suggests that with decades of experience, the band knew how to use it more subtly or more powerfully when needed. And when you put that right up against the sometimes teeny raw sound of the 50s country compilation.
But no contest. The sonic depth of Once More must have just been overwhelming.
And that level of polish is why these new versions of hits like Gold and True and To Cut a Long Story Short were singled out. The reviewer said they were potentially superior to the originals from the 80s.
That is a big statement, a controversial one for a lot of fans, I'm sure, but it's grounded in this specific listening process.
And it links up perfectly with what the band themselves said. The source material mentions Gary Kemp commenting that these new versions are how he would have recorded them back in the day if they'd had the know-how.
If they'd had the expertise, the production knowledge, the maturity.
All of it. So this shifts the album from just being a retrospective to being, an artistic fulfillment. They're basically going back and correcting the past, completing their original vision.
Which is an incredibly powerful concept in a competition like this. When you're listening back to back, those production limitations from the 80s or 90s, they can really show their age.
They absolutely can.
Yeah.
But a newly engineered version, reflecting decades of experience and all the tech advances, it just stands a much better chance of sounding robust and current. Once More completely capitalized on that technical advantage. It turned maturity into sonic superiority.
But it wasn't a perfect victory. There was one crack in the armor, one specific song where the reinterpretation apparently fell short.
Through the Barricades.
Through the Barricades.
And this exception is fascinating because it almost proves the rule. The reviewer says that for this one song, the original recording is still the definitive article.
And it's not just some random observation, is it? There's a personal connection.
A huge one. The source material says this is the reviewer's absolute favorite Spandau Ballet track.
Okay. So in this one instance, personal history and that deep emotional connection, it just trumped any technical improvement.
Exactly. When a song means that much to you personally, the original version gets tangled up with all the memories of hearing it for the first time. It's almost impossible for a rework, no matter how much better it sounds technically, to replace that emotional core.
It's a great little case study, really. Even when an album is almost universally better on a technical level, giving you better versions of Gold or True, that nostalgic bond to one specific beloved song can keep the original on a pedestal. It's emotion over engineering.
But, and this is the crucial part, it wasn't enough to derail the album's overall win, not by a long shot.
No, absolutely not. The conclusion was crystal clear. Despite that one slight, the album was the decisive victor. It easily dismantled the group, becoming the worthy winner.
It just set a standard for quality and polish in that group that the other three, well, they just couldn't touch. Not in that kind of high-pressure listening environment.
It's like it won the production war before the music even started.
That's a great way to put it. It really did.
So that brings us to the two country albums.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really interesting because they represent two completely different sides of the genre.
And they offer such a sharp lesson in how different styles either, thrive or just completely wither in this kind of intense format. Despite both being labeled country, they sounded worlds apart, two different historical moments.
And that's the vital distinction, isn't it? We had the historically important one, classic country golden 50s, which got eliminated.
Right.
And then we had the smooth-voiced crooner Jim Reeves, who the reviewer had never even heard of, and he sails through.
It's a fascinating outcome.
Let's start with the one that got cut. The one that, despite its foundational role in music history, just didn't make it.
Okay, so this collection, Classic Country Golden 50s, is basically a time capsule of various artists' compilation of early country rock hits from the 50s.
So this is the primordial soup, right, where traditional country and blues and that brand new rock and roll sound were all starting to mix together.
Exactly. The historical importance of these recordings is, it's unquestionable. These are foundational texts of modern music. The real question is, how does that historical importance hold up against the sheer polished listenability of Spandau Ballet's modern rework?
Or the ambient smoothness of Jim Reeves.
Right, and the star power on this compilation is huge. These are genre-defining tracks. The review calls out Jimmy Rogers' "Oh No, I'm Falling in Love Again," Furlin Husky with Gone.
And the Everly Brothers' wonderful Claudette. These are songs that literally chronicle a shift in American music.
Absolutely. The reviewer even noted their personal favorite from the collection was Johnny Horton's Honky Tonk Man.
Ooh.
And you've got other catchy tunes like Webb Pierce's in the Jailhouse Now. And Johnny Cash shows up twice, just, doing what Johnny Cash does.
That classic raw narrative style.
On Ballad of a Teenage Queen and The Ways of a Woman in Love.
So the review paints this picture of a really cohesive but very vintage sound. But the key analytical point, the thing that decided its fate, was the style assessment. The reviewer says it leans more Elvis than Garth Brooks.
And that comparison is everything. It's the key differentiator. It immediately tells you this is not the slick, radio-friendly, heavily produced country of the 90s or today.
No, this is raw.
It's heavily weighted towards that R&B and rock and roll style. It's gritty, it's early electric guitar, often with a much simpler, less refined production standard, which was just typical of the 50s. These tracks are essential because they're raw and energetic and tied to the birth of rock and roll.
Okay, but hold on. I have to challenge that a bit. If this music is so vibrant, if it's the birth of whole new sound, this fusion of R&B and country, why wouldn't that raw energy carry it through? Why would it lose to something as, mild as Jim Reeves?
Because of the methodology. That's where the Album Quest's rules come into play. The very rawness, that historical production, is what ultimately failed it.
How so?
When you're listening to 4 albums over and over again, back to back, the limitations of 1950s mono or very early stereo recording, the thinner sound, the sometimes shrill high end on the instruments, it all gets magnified.
I see.
That raw energy, which is a total virtue in isolation, it can become grating or distracting when you're directly comparing it to the sonic polish of the Spandau Ballet reworks.
So the final word, the fatal flaw, was that the collection's musicality is somewhat bettered by historical significance, even though it had a clear, easy listening charm.
That phrase says it all. That's why it finished in 4th place. In a contest that's purely about the listening experience today, the historical value, the academic knowledge of why these songs matter, it's just not enough.
It couldn't overcome the production style.
Not when judged against the high polish of the winner and the relentless smoothness of the other qualifier. It was a fascinating artifact, but it just wasn't a contender for Best Album based on sustained listenability.
And so this collection of legends, with all its historical weight, gets eliminated. And that paves the way for the other, almost opposite country album to sneak through.
And this, for me, is the most intriguing result of the whole group. The very best of Jim Reeves. It didn't just survive, it got second place and advanced, even though the reviewer was coming in completely cold.
That lack of familiarity is the single most important detail in this whole thing. The reviewer had never, ever heard of him before. None of the songs were familiar.
Which means any possibility of nostalgia bias is completely gone, wiped out.
It forces the judgment to be based purely on the immediate sound, which is exactly what the album quest is supposed to do. It was judged solely on its merits in that moment.
And Jim Reeves is identified as an American country and pop singer, and he was a key figure in what became known as the Nashville sound.
We have to understand what that is to get why he succeeded.
Absolutely. The Nashville sound came about in the late 50s and early 60s as a direct, deliberate commercial reaction against that raw honky-tonk sound we were just talking about.
So if the 50s country was raw and influenced by R&B, the Nashville sound was explicitly designed to make country music more palatable, to get it on pop radio.
Precisely. It smoothed out all the rough edges. It replaced the fiddle and the steel guitar with lush string arrangements with backing choruses with piano.
And the reviewer's comparison for his style immediately puts him outside of that gritty, traditional country box. He's compared to Andy Williams, not Glenn Campbell or Billy Ray Cyrus.
That Andy Williams comparison is perfect. He's the absolute essence of easy listening pop crooning. It tells you everything you need to know. The Jim Reeves collection is heavy on the vocal performance, heavy on the orchestral depth, and very, very light on anything that sounds like challenging country music.
And the reviewer describes his voice as deep and velvet.
The voice is the absolute strength of the album. But the secret to its success in this specific format, the album quest, was its ability to be effortlessly enjoyable without ever demanding your full attention.
That makes so much sense. In a test where you have to listen to 4 albums on a loop, the one that doesn't annoy you, that doesn't challenge you, that just provides this smooth, pleasant background, it gains a huge advantage just by being non-aggressive.
It was called a sappy romantic storytelling croon. And it was so easy listening that it melds into the background.
You contrast that with the 50s compilation, which demanded your attention because of its raw energy and dated sound, or the Spandau Ballet album, which demanded attention with its slick polish. Jim Reeves just offered sonic comfort.
The review even elaborates on the instrumentation, which really defines that Nashville sound. It's sporadic ivory tinkling and orchestration.
Right, and only a faint eminence of the country style through irregular and low-key guitar.
That faint eminence is the key phrase. The country instruments are technically there, but they're buried under the strings and the piano. It's the difference between music that asserts itself like a rock album and music that's just atmospheric.
The Jim Reeves collection is almost like, I don't know, highly sophisticated sonic wallpaper.
That's it. It's pleasant, it's non-demanding, and it's beautifully sung. The repetition that's built into the album quest methodology probably worked in its favor because it just never tired the listener out.
And that's exactly what happened. The album, even though it didn't blow anyone away, it just sneaks a plucky second place and moves on to the next round.
It survived by being relentlessly, almost anonymously pleasant. And that was enough to beat the historically important compilation and the folk rock album we're about to get to. It won on the strength of its low-demand ambiance.
Okay, so we've got our 2 qualifiers. The decisive winner, Spandau Ballet, driven by technical polish, and the surprise qualifier, Jim Reeves, driven by this non-challenging, easy listening vibe.
Which leaves the 2 albums that were eliminated.
And the critique of Suzanne Vega's Days of Open Hand is just a classic example of how inconsistency gets punished, I mean severely punished, in a head-to-head competition like this.
It really is a study in disappointment, but specifically disappointment relative to expectation. Suzanne Vega has this reputation for sharp, poetic folk rock. She enters the quest with her 1990 album, Days of Open Hand.
And the reviewer frames it as more of the same poetic folk rock storytelling.
Right. But unlike the Jim Reeves album, which really benefited from having zero expectations.
The Suzanne Vega album was crushed by the weight of her previous stronger work.
Exactly. The reviewer notes that while this was her third studio album, it was the fourth album of hers they'd listened to for the quest, and was judged to be clearly the weakest. When an artist builds that kind of reputation for intense, high-quality lyrical music, any perceived dip in quality gets judged really harshly. The critique said the album had this dual nature. Her stories could still enthrall, but the material limps in places.
And that's the definition of inconsistency, isn't it? Moments of brilliance that are just dragged down by tracks of, well, mediocrity.
And this a killer in this format.
Let's talk about the specific language used here, because it's pretty sharp. It reveals just how deep that disappointment ran. The album was called Hit and Miss, but the low points were described as a desert of insipidness.
That's a strong phrase.
It is. What does that even mean musically in the context of folk rock?
Well, in folk rock, insipidness usually means a few things. It could be overly repetitive instrumentation, or lyrical ideas that kind of meander and never reach a compelling point, or arrangements that just feel undercooked compared to the stronger songs on the same album.
So the filler tracks weren't just okay, they were actively boring.
They were causing the listener's attention to wander, especially on the third or fourth listen. In the album quest, if you mentally check out, the album loses. And the review makes it clear that these low points really overwhelmed the few bright spots.
But there were bright spots. Even in this desert of insipidness, there were still these oases, as the review called them. We should give credit to the moments that kept it from finishing dead last.
For sure. The review specifically calls out a sumptuous piece of guitar on Rusted Pipe.
Sumptuous, that's a great word.
It suggests the playing on that one track was rich, it was complex, it was emotionally satisfying. It's a reminder that the high-level artistry was still there. It was just sporadic.
And then there's that really fascinating, almost nerdy detail about the track Pilgrimage. The reviewer quite liked it and noted that it opens with a pseudo-Japanese sound.
And then compared it to a progressive rock band.
Incredibly similar, they said, to a piece by the band IQ called The Other Side.
This specific comparison is just extraordinary. It shows you the reviewer's, extensive cross-genre listening habits. They're not just a fan of one thing.
But the really surprising part is the timing.
The IQ track wasn't released until 10 years after Suzanne Vega's album.
So it's not influence, it's just a brilliant sonic coincidence that was picked up on by a reviewer with this kind of encyclopedic knowledge. It really reinforces how seriously they're taking the listening process. Even the high points are getting this deep analysis.
But at the end of the day, a few good tracks and an interesting sonic coincidence, it just wasn't enough to save the album.
No. That one phrase from the review just seals its fate. Such highlights remain a tiny oasis amongst a desert of insipidness.
And in the final count, that inconsistency was catastrophic. It finished in third place, eliminated. It lost out to the Jim Reeves collection.
Which is pretty damning, really.
It's a failure of sustained quality. It couldn't compete with the polished reworks of Spandau Ballet or the non-challenging background smoothness of Jim Reeves. The Vega album, because of a reputation, it demanded your attention, but then it often failed to reward it.
So after this whole multi-listen showdown, we get the final definitive rankings for Group 230. Let's just state them clearly because it produced such a strange pair of qualifiers.
Okay, here we go. In first place, Once More by Spandau Ballet, the technologically superior polished victor.
Advancing easily.
In second place, Sneaking Through, the very best of Jim Reeves, the unfamiliar smooth crooner who won on sheer easy listening ambiance.
The plucky qualifier.
Then in third place, and eliminated, Days of Open Hand by Suzanne Vega, the inconsistent and ultimately disappointing folk rock entry.
And rounding out the group in fourth place, also eliminated, Classic Country Golden 50s, the historically significant but sonically rough compilation.
What a bizarre pair of albums to advance.
It really is. Superior modern polish and historic vocal tranquility.